Thank you, David and Daniil, for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. You guys are a couple of futurists. Well, first of all, you're brothers. You're futurists, you're serial entrepreneurs, investors. Most recently spent a few years at Snap, working on some of the stuff at Snapchat after they acquired your previous company. And you guys are up to all sorts of stuff. You work with two of your sisters, where you have a holding company called LibermansCo, and you've got a company called Product Science, another one called Humanism. And it's sort of too complex for an intro, but we're going to dig into all of this stuff later in the conversation. But to get started, for those who don't know you or any of these companies or anything like that, I would love to hear sort of you guys tell your story from as early as you're willing to start to where you are today, and some of the decisions you made along the way. And I should say this is actually, a pretty special episode. This is the first time I've had two guests on for, instead of a one-on-one interview. And it's fitting because you guys are basically like one person together. So kind of works out. So looking forward to hearing the story, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, as one person, we will from time to time interrupt each other. So hope it will work for the audio. Hey, so the earlier, usually we would start our story from our dad was born in 1925, and then would go through the dad's story and then the mom's story and then them working together and then having six of us 1 year apart, the six kids. And then how our story unraveled, and then how the four of us started to work with each other, and then eventually how we get where we are today. So I'm not sure that it's the best use of time right now to go like as early as that 1925, but that's where a part of what is our current passions are about started, like with our dad. Our dad was a scientist working in the field of biophysics, trying to figure out how our consciousness works. And that's the part of our upbringing was both our mom and dad working in the laboratory most of the days, while the six of us were hanging out with each other, going to kindergartens and school, staying with our grandma. And then we was like all of us were born in Soviet Union still in 80s, but then the Soviet Union collapsed and our life drastically changed in 90s. The parents lost their job. Basically, the family of six school kids and the unemployed parents was quite an interesting time, up until the two of us started making more money than both of our parents by just fixing computers for the neighbors, babysitting, then building websites. And at some point, lots of our ideas started converging into what we actually want to do in our life. And we realized through some live events and experience, we realized that probably the best way for us to achieve those ideas, those goals which we set for ourselves, would be to start building businesses, make enough money to finance the development of the products which we foresee and needed to be created in order for us to achieve what we want global human society to achieve, to come to. And that's how our business career started. Later on, years later, we invited our sisters to join. And after our first large company bankrupt in 2008-9, after that, the sisters stayed. Everyone else left, but the sisters stayed. And therefore, the very next company which we started together with them as partners. And since then, all of our companies we create together as equal partners, the four of us. And therefore, the current state of us creating Libermans Corporation, which represents the next 30 years of our future, also includes the four of us. I don't know if I'm jumping too fast, starting too early, like a century ago, but then jumping too fast to the current days. But let's say that's a brief story of the Libermans.
No, yeah, that's great. It's I've had people who have started, pretty close to like the day that they were born. I don't think I've had anyone who go back to the day that their parents were born. So started very, very early. And I think that was a good overview to frame the conversation a bit. And we can talk about, some of your guys' previous business ventures and time at Snapchat. And maybe I'll ask just sort of one question there because I do want to discuss LibermansCo and what you're working on now. And I think we're going to need a good amount of time, or at least I'm going to want a good amount of time to talk through some of that. But, you built the company. Maybe you could talk a little bit about it. I think it was called Kernel, which you sold to Snap. And then you're sort of responsible for like the Bitmoji sort of feature over there, as well as just making the engineering department a lot more efficient, I understand. And when you guys joined, I think Snapchat was in a bit of a tough spot, like struggling a bit, and you guys were, I understand, pretty instrumental in their turnaround over the subsequent years. Can you talk a little bit about sort of that journey arriving at Snapchat and then helping with sort of the turnaround as being a part of the team there?
So we joined a little bit earlier than the turnaround. So we built several companies, several technologies in computer graphics in the past. And so when the new wave of new era of machine learning and applied computer vision started, we actually launched this company, Kernel, which were focused on 3D avatars. Previously, we had a quite successful animation business, so we use our experience in new vision, what kind of technologies can be built in this field. We used to develop new technology, and eventually we were acquired by Snap. And so at Snap, we initially were focused on building 3D avatars. So 3D Bitmoji, currently, I believe still it's one of the most used daily avatar in the world. So our team built it together with the previously acquired by Snapchat Bitmoji team. This was a 2D avatar system, which we converted into 3D. And then when in 2018, there was a quite rough year for Snap. It was first time in the history of the company when audience started to decline. We kind of played the role of proving to the executive team of the company that this decline was due to performance degradation of the app. At that moment, the general belief was that this decline was due to competitors' actions. Facebook launched stories in Instagram and in Facebook, and TikTok was growing. So mostly market attributed the decline to that situation, but we managed to prove that it was all due to problems on the engineering side, and then managed to pull the resources of the company towards changing that. And when the performance of the app was fixed, the audience started to grow. Maybe you heard that Snap recently announced the new numbers, that it's already 750 million
MAU. So the audience keep growing since then with the same speed. So it was a quite interesting moment for us to be involved in.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. And did you prove by just fixing the problem that that was the issue as opposed to market forces and competitors? Or did you have some sort of way of proving that before going in and trying to fix it?
It was quite a long process of us first trying to, like, not trying, like, um, um,
show it in the data and making the research to prove the correlation between the events which led to the degradation of the performance and the audience engagement change, as well as designing some tests which also allowed everyone to align on the theory.
Right. And so you guys ended up spending what, like around 4 years over at Snap, and then maybe you can just give the timeline of sort of like when you left, when you started LibermansCo, and just to sort of give a general framework for what you guys are up to, and maybe when you started product science and humanism as well, and then we can dig into each of those different pieces.
So approximately after 4 years at Snap, we knew that our deal was our gentleman agreement was over, and even though we spent a little bit more than that, it was mostly because we wanted to finalize some of the project which we started, and but already at that period of time we started to think, like, brainstorm among the Libermans what's going to be the next. Obviously, everyone, all four of us, knew that we're just going to create new companies. For us, it's also always sort of a challenging choice whether we go and just build what we feel the market will buy right now, right away, or whether we go and build something which is disruptive and therefore requires huge effort in order to prove that market even need this. But then the effort can lead to a very important changes in market behavior or social behavior and stuff like this. So at this point, we were ideating what we want to do next. There were some crazy ideas, like, should we just jump into the quantum biological quantum computers, continue like as a continuation of our parents' works of 70s and 80s, or whether we should just do something which companies, like big companies, going to be ready to start paying money right away. When we had this brainstorm, we also come up with an idea through a really long, several-day argue about how we're going to do our next venture, in terms of who's, like, whether we're going to invest our own money or whether we're going to go and raise. The idea that we can take this money from our own future was the one which came to our mind. And we then went and checked it with a number of investors who immediately find it really interesting and said, like, yes, we'd love to, like, invest, like, buy a share of the future of all the companies which you guys will create in the next 30 years. And therefore, we then spend next 5-ish, I want to say, months researching and developing the framework, legal agreements, understanding how the valuation should be set, etc. And then in May, we left Snap. We immediately started the LibermansCo. The first investors were Slow Ventures. Sam Lessing really loved the idea. He actually was the one who tried the idea 20 years before. And therefore still was looking forward to see for this idea to become reality. It's just no one ever, like, everyone who tried it before tried different formats, and none of them worked for some reason. So we just had to come up with another hypothesis of how it can work out. So our hypothesis, the Slow Ventures really liked it. So they invested in what we created as a LibermansCo, and then right away we knew that the LibermansCo was created as a holding of our future output, and our future output is creating new companies. So the next thing was to create a new company, anyways. And the new company was we decided to go with something which we felt market will like. Not just we felt, we checked with a number of companies, number of startups, whether they will be ready to pay for the service of increasing speed and performance of mobile applications. And as soon as we got like a clear feedback that companies are ready to pay, we started the product science. And product science, in few months already, we created the first version of the product, with the idea that we can apply all of our knowledge on how to find inefficiencies in the source code, and then apply everything which is currently possible with AI, to combine this knowledge with AI and automate as much as possible the same process which can be done manually, but it requires days, if not months, for an app, for a complex app. But with our software now, it takes hours before the problems are discovered and the possible solutions are suggested to the developers of apps.
Great. That's a yeah, no, that was a really helpful like sort of outline of and ordering of the events, because it wasn't totally clear even from like the research and everything. But let's start with LibermansCo. It's like you mentioned, it's the two of you, it's your two sisters. I understand you raised at a valuation of $400 million. So roughly you could think of it as like $100 million per Liberman, in a sense, even though it's all of you combined. And maybe you're all sort of one person in a sense, at least literally you are one entity now. And so I don't know like where exactly to plug in, because there's so many interesting aspects of this, but you mentioned sort of the difficulty of, it's one thing to have an idea of like, okay, we want to take all of our future earnings and income and basically sell shares in that, entity that collects all of that. It's another thing to actually make it sort of work within, existing legal frameworks, or iterate upon existing legal frameworks in a way that can make it work. So the way you guys did that, you sort of alluded to this, but you basically created a holdco, standard Delaware C Corp. That's LibermansCo. And then the four of you, I understand, all signed basically what I think you're calling founder contribution and pledge agreements. And this is what basically assigns all of your assets for the next 30 years, like you said, to this holding company. And that's the thing that you mentioned, you went to Sam Lesson from Slow Ventures, and he, invested a certain amount of money for a certain percentage of that holdco. Is that right so far?
Yes, everything is correct. The only thing that actually the first round which we made with Slow Ventures was at 200 million, so 50 each. And then already after some additional events, after we launched the product science, after product science raised some first external funding, only after that the valuation grew. And that's what we also wanted to show, that when you invest in such securities, then you actually, as an investor, can get an upside, that the shares of these entities will grow in similar way as you would expect from startups. And yes, we invested some time in building the proper structure. We thought that it was really important to make it scalable, make it as something investors get used to. So C Corp, yes. So if you are a venture investor, you get used to invest in such entities. In this case, there is no difference for investors. So that's why Slow Ventures as a fund, they were able to invest in such entity. And then we also spent some time doing legal research of what is enforceable, how both sides can be protected, because we as the founders want to be protected and want our freedom to be to stay, and us as investors, when we put a head of investor, we want to understand that this type of agreement will be enforceable, and that investors will be able to get in the future the share of the results of created companies. So we checked that this structure will work. We especially initially focused on investment in tech founders. This is an area we understand well, as well as one of the aspects of our approach, that we realize that we shouldn't start from people too early in the career, but vice versa, we should start from people who already prove themselves and who already had some entrepreneurial background, so that legally will be sure that people understand what is investment and what are nuances of this type of agreements, as well as allowing us to first do small amount of deals with a high probability of outcome.
Right. So let me sort of try to reflect that thesis back a little bit to make sure I understand, because, you know, when I think about this type of idea, which just overall generally the concept of being able to invest in people basically is super interesting to me, to allow people to have some liquidity earlier on in their lives to, you know, pursue whatever they want to do and not feel like they have to go and work jobs that they don't want to work, just to, you know, basically get a little bit of financial freedom. And you end up getting that financial freedom by the time you're sort of like out of your prime, and then, you know, you don't have as much maybe energy and motivation to go and do the things you want to do. But what you're talking about is starting with a smaller number of, you know, individuals basically, and focusing on these sort of higher probability bets where they've already started companies, maybe they've already had successful exits. And the rationale for doing that is because you don't want to start with like a ton of volume just for simplicity purposes from the beginning in the first place. And second, because, you know, it can be viewed, it's sort of a controversial subject as it is. And so you might as well be dealing with more sophisticated founders who understand terms like this from prior venture capital raises and things like that, versus dealing with, you know, an 18-year-old from, you know, whatever international or US or whatever it might be, who just has never seen a term sheet and doesn't really know exactly what they're signing up for. Or, you know, you can try to teach them as much as you want, but like they could sort of claim that they didn't know what they were doing. So it's sort of a safer and more just rational approach to start with these sort of experienced founder types like yourselves, basically. Is that basically the logic?
Yes, including some additional insights which are for some reason missed by others, is that this particular area of venture founders is very researchable in terms of available data. Moreover, majority of the venture firms and venture investment are done today through the prism of this available data and statistics. Therefore, the logic behind the investment in companies can be also applied, similar logic can be applied to investment in individuals themselves as sort of like a sequence of startups, because like a founder can be perceived as a sequence of future attempts, failed one or successful ones. over the course of 10, 15, 20, 30 years of their career. So this is quite an interesting insight, because from this perspective, you are able to suggest specific valuation for the investors to invest, and specific risk profile for investors to decide whether they want to invest at these conditions or not. This is one perspective. And the additional one is that it seemed to be rational and expected that younger people, or people at the beginning of their career, would want to raise money using this model just because they still don't have reputation, and it's sort of might make their capital raise, access to capital for them, easier. While the more experienced founders don't need it, for sure, because they can clearly raise money from the venture firms. While the truth is that there are reasons, and lots of different reasons, for the experienced founders to raise money through this mechanism as well. And that's what we are about to prove and show through the series of sequence of investments, which we're going to do this year, like at least 10, 20, 30 people we want to invest this year. And we have a wait list, of 50 to 60 people who are ready to raise money with our model, which is really interesting. And this is and the group of people going to be quite interesting, experienced entrepreneurs who can easily raise money from the top venture firms on the market. And yet they understand why they would need to use a model like ours.
So just to be clear, for people, listening, what we're talking about here when you say you guys are going to invest in, 20 or 30 or however many founders this year, we're talking about basically the activity of the sort of first of its kind VC firm that you guys are starting called Humanism, which, is basically sitting under LibermansCo, or at least the profits from it are flowing to LibermansCo as part of, the holdco and the whole arrangement. So LibermansCo is like sort of your own version of, okay, the Libermans are now an investable asset. And then you've created this venture firm to go and find a bunch of other LibermansCos and create a bunch of other LibermansCos that you guys can invest in as sort of on the investor side of things. So it's a little bit like of a meta thing, but just to clarify for people listening. And then the question I have for you based on what you just said, which was interesting, adding those couple of points. You mentioned these, 40 or 60 founders on the wait list, that there's some really interesting people that you guys are excited to invest in. A lot of them could raise from sort of top tier VC. But then you had also said sort of like there's reasons why, they might not want to, they might prefer this route. It's actually unclear to me. It's clear to me, like you said, why someone earlier in their career who might have trouble, getting investment would want to go this route. But for someone who would have VCs sort of knocking at the door for their next venture, someone like you guys, for example, why is this more attractive than raising from a VC in a traditional way for the company, and B, investing some of your own capital to the extent that the venture can be bootstrapped for a little while off of your own capital if you guys have made some money, or some of these founders have made some money, basically bootstrapping the thing.
Right. So that's exactly one of this discoveries, something unknown, which we figured. The reasons are different for different people, but some of them are, for example, if we think about this for the perspective of chances of your next company to be successful, statistically, only on average through the market, only 1 out of 100 companies which got seed investment in the United States have a chance to get to $1 billion+ valuation. While for the people with experience, for people who previously sold their companies with pretty significant exits, like in tens of millions of dollars type of exits and acquisitions, the statistics shows that their probability of creating $1 billion company increases 6.5 times.
Hmm.
So but it's still not 100%. And therefore, it's, let's say, what is going to be a little bit more than 10%, let's say, simplifying it, let's in between 10 and 15% chance to create a billion-dollar company, which is still not 100%. Therefore, for the fund, when they invest in such individual, they still see this as a statistical game. They would still need to invest in 10 plus companies of founders like that in order to have a statistical chance of hitting the outlier, the unicorn.
Mm-hmm.
For the founders themselves, they should strongly believe that their very next company is a billion-dollar one. Like, it's not that like, oh, I will create this one, it's probably going to fail, and the next one, and then the 1 in 10 going to be a billion-dollar. That doesn't work this way. So for the founder, you strongly believe that this is a great idea. That's why you're going to spend your next 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 10, 15 years with this company. If it's a successful company, then you're clearly going to spend 10 plus years with this. Like, if it's a billion-dollar company, if it's something like of a $100 billion scale, you will spend 15 to 20 years working with this company, working for this company. Therefore, for the founder, you strongly believe that the very next one is the one which will be sort of last one, sort of. Mm-hmm. While if you clearly look at this from a chances perspective, you should understand that for the investors, they would give you valuation not as if it's a 100% chance unicorn, but as if it's a 10% chance a unicorn. And this valuation will include all the chances of other 9 of investees to fail, like other 9 besides you. Like, you clearly is a billion-dollar company, but other 9 are failures if you're the winner, and therefore your valuation, which investors are ready to give you right now, decreased with the chance of failures of the 9 others. Now, if you look at this from the perspective of you raising money into your future, you basically includes in this personal valuation a number of attempts, as if it's 3 to 5 different attempts in the next 5 years. So your chances, the chances that one of these 3 to 5 companies are going to be is going to be a billion-dollar, a unicorn, is much higher.
And because of that, so you as a founder can retain a higher share in your very next venture. You will be diluted less. You know, like most of the founders, like first-time founders who had some exits, they actually experience the fact that they, by the time of the exit, by the time of unicorn, they were diluted significantly. And when they launch a next company, they really want to make it different when they will be able to retain a higher share of this future success. And our model enables that, and that's why it's resonate a lot with their previous experience and with what they want to achieve with a new venture.
As we said, the latest investment which we raised into the Libermans was at a valuation of $100 million per each of us. Should each of us start a new startup right now and try to raise seed money from venture firms, as much as we are experienced founders with several exits behind us and with successful companies behind us, current average market statistics wouldn't allow investors like venture firms to put money in this next startups at a valuation higher than $30 million, probably even $20 million, $20 to $30 million, which is like 3 times smaller valuation than for just one of us.
So if we de-risk investors with our future, we can raise like $2-3 million of the seed money for the next project with a much lower dilution, retaining the full 100% share of the next company which we start. And through that process, by the time when we will need to raise more in the Series A or Series B stage, we will retain a higher share, and through that, our future exits would be much more fruitful for us.
And for the investors who invested in us.
But there is actually another reason some of the experienced founders choose this model. And this reason is that all of us have some ideas of moonshots. And these moonshots usually they are
much harder to raise money for.
They almost impossible to raise money for, and but all experienced founders they have such ideas, and they want to have resources to experiment and to invest some of the resources and some of their own efforts to actually build prototypes and then already convert it to a business which would be able to raise money externally.
We all want not us risking our own money, but the venture funds risking the money, because that's the whole deal. But we all want to put this money at the stake for an ability to create something which no one clearly believes. Like it's the rocket which can land.
Yeah, the companies like SpaceX are possible only right now, only when founders already are ready to invest their own fortune to prove that this type of ideas are possible to implement. And we see huge potential with the idea, with the model which we propose to enable hundreds more of the moonshots, which will affect the world in the way different apps like mobile apps type of startups cannot.
Okay, so that was a very helpful explanation. I'll try to just summarize quickly. Basically, as a founder, as an experienced founder with successes under your belt, you want to start a new company. You believe that new company is going to be the company because, you're sort of, by virtue of starting a company, you're sort of signing on for like a 10+ year commitment, and you think that's going to be the one. The investors on the other side think, well, this is just statistical, and yes, they have an increased chance of starting a unicorn, but it's out of their control. Like just because you've succeeded once doesn't mean you will again. And so maybe it won't be this one, but if they start a few over the next 30 years, odds are sort of improved, and therefore you guys can raise at a higher valuation than you would for an individual venture because the investors appreciate that eventually this founder, first of all, it's just a different type of vehicle than they're accustomed to seeing. So there's not like market comps that say, okay, most of these seed rounds are happening at 15 or 20 million and, they're experienced. So maybe we can do 30 or 40 or something, but there's no comps here. So that it's sort of freeing in that way. And then secondarily, they realize that they're getting sort of multiple, at bats from the same founder, where it's not just one venture or one idea that they're betting on, but, a series of attempts basically over a few decades. And then what you're saying, I think, is this enables more investment in moonshots because, well, specifically capital intensive moonshots, I guess, because for something like SpaceX, there's a ton of capital required and a very low probability that it works out from an investment perspective. And so you either have to be sort of crazy enough to believe that it's going to, despite the odds, or you invest in the person that's like Elon, and he can raise capital at a huge valuation because he's Elon, and he can then go plow that money into SpaceX. And if it doesn't work, he just sells some more of his equity later on at a very high valuation and can sort of move on to the next moonshot. Is that a reasonable sort of summary?
And probably not. Like in parallel, Elon runs several companies. Like in our case, for example, we run, like, product science takes lots of our time because it's a business with clients. We sell, we produce product, we hire people. Like it's an ongoing process. And in parallel, we have several hypotheses which we want to check. We hire a couple people there, the scientists usually, and they do some research. And we invest some money into this direction. And it's harder for us to go and raise money for that from the investors it's just a hypothesis check. It's much easier for us to raise money for the product, for something like product science, when it's sales process and you just increase, like you just grow. But we can run these things in parallel. And by the moment when the experiments will get to the point when we are sure that we can raise money from external investors, or we are sure that we are ready to invest even more of our own capital into this, being able to sell some of the stake in the product science and investing this into the experiments in parallel, gives us lots of flexibility, gives us ability to even execute such projects.
Yes, in other things which you can find through data, and this is also interesting point to mention of difference of point of view of investors and founders. That when you're an investor, all the attempts for you are the same. You have your fund set to 7 to 10 years, and all the investments which you made are the same in terms of potential future output. That's why, for example, it's almost a standard of what would be your seed valuation. It's not much of the difference between startups. But for founders, failures and successes are different in terms of expected time you would spend on them. So on failures, you will spend much less time than on successes. That's why when an investor will tell you, okay, like out of 10 attempts, only 1 would be successful and 9 will fail. In this case, okay, but this 9 failures will take less time than 9 successes would take. So per failure, you need like around 3 years of your time, but per success, you need 10 years of your time. And that's why when you deal with such statistics, for you to actually, if you truly believe that the very next venture has a much higher probability than everyone expect it to be successful, in this case, for you, it's much better to raise money through our model, because you use all this time expected on failures, and the expectations that it will be much shorter.
Right. So for these agreements that we're talking about, just to be clear, roughly it's like 1 to 10% in the hold company that is, being exchanged for the capital raised in the first round. I don't know. What did you guys do for the first at 200 million and then for the second at 400 million?
Yeah, so usually we already did some of similar investment in other individuals as well. And usually we would offer, and the same we used with ourselves, for first round to be something around like 5% or a little bit less. And
sure.
expanded.
In our case, it was smaller than that, just because we were the first one to even try. But with the further we go, the more we see it's going to be a standard that 5 to 10% is going to be the first round. Let's say it's like we can see this through the prism of rounds as well.
Yep.
Then should the attempt of the founder be failures for the next couple of years, and then all the money which they raised from the first 5% are spent and no output, then they can sell another 5 and make another round of attempts. So it's sort of similar approach as when you with a normal startup activity. You start a company, you failed, you start another one, you failed, you start another one, you're successful, or just some exit.
But as soon as investors will see some of the founders perform much better than the others, we expect that these founders would be able to raise at a higher valuation and eventually a higher share of their future outcome.
Right. So that's sort of the amount of the investment, the percentage, the valuation, and the schedule is basically 15 or 30 years. For you guys, I think it's 30, and for Humanism, you're going to do variable between 15 and 30 years worth of income, basically.
Yes, so that's what we usually discuss. We just discuss these two standards. With shorter deals, the valuation start to be not as
drastically
different. That's why
I'm just raising money to the next startup.
Yes, that's why for founders the difference is not enough to consider the overhead of the new model.
It's all a statistical game, as we said, like statistic of how many failures and successes you need before you hitting the outlier.
Most of the deals we see right now, they are about 30 years.
And is there a point where, I'm just thinking about it, like, let's take Product Science, your guys' company, as an example. I know you guys recently raised a Series A. The company is doing quite well. Is there a point where, you mentioned you're raising for the holding company so that you can, start all of these various things and test hypotheses and whatnot. Is the money that you're raising on your holdco sort of more for the earlier stage funding, where past a certain point of, like, whether it's product market fit or a certain, number in revenue, you're more focused on just actually using the company's entities to raise so that you're not diluting the holdco any further?
It's both, honestly. So yes, we see this mostly right now because we are in the early stage, let's say, of all of our ventures, that we use this money for the early stage development of the new ventures. But at the same time, we can clearly see that at some point we can reinvest some of this money into the second round, like Series A, B's round of our own companies, to double back on them.
So right now we actually prefer on the next stages of the ventures to have external capital, because with external capital you also kind of getting the external valuation for this subsidiaries. In this case, this external valuation of the subsidiaries affect the holding valuation. So we actually believe that it would be quite balanced to use both. And you're right that primarily to use this capital for on the stage when you believe in the venture more than external market believes. This is the right approach. As soon as external market already, for external market, it's obvious that this idea works, that this company works. In this case, it is reasonable to raise for these separate companies.
Yeah, it's interesting. So as well, a couple of directions I want to go. First, I saw in your what was it called? The founder contribution and pledge agreement. There was a bunch of, there's certain assets that are explicitly mentioned as included and others that are explicitly mentioned excluded. There was a couple on the excluded list that I thought were kind of interesting. One was rights to a certain small percentage, under 1% of future income in a couple of individuals. And I saw that and I'm like, were those beta tests basically for you guys on like sort of the humanism model? And was that like before or after you guys did it yourselves? How can I think about like those? Are those like early experiments basically that you've done?
Yes. So we usually, when we do these deals, in the same we apply to ourselves, that if we already have some previous investments, it's not as important to transfer them into the holding structure. And that's these examples which are mentioned in the exclude list. This was those experiments which we did before we formally, legally created the structure and signed the first investment. And that's why we just added them into the exclude list. The similar things we do when we invest in the founder in other founders. If they already have some investment, we don't bother them to transfer them into holding structure.
Not necessary. Like we would prefer, but not necessary would bother them.
Yes, and but if you have, if a founder has a share in the companies they actively participate, in this case, it is important for them to transfer this into holding structures.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Originally, as you were sort of giving that explanation, I was like, oh yeah, of course, you guys made these investments prior to the agreement. Of course, they would be excluded. And then as you kept talking through it, I was like, well, I guess there's situations where, for example, maybe a former founder who had an exit just started a company a year ago, and he's applied to, for an investment from you guys through Humanism. And it's like, well, he's obviously going to be working on that for several more years. That equity should be included. So it's sort of hard to draw a hard line, but there's enough of a template there where you can go on a case by case basis and sort of address the edge cases of what's included and not included. And just by the virtue of the nature of the agreement, you don't really have to worry about like, oh, this guy, bought a few shares of Facebook a few years ago. Are those included or not? Like, that's not what's going to move the needle. What's going to move the needle is, their big, like their big piece of equity in their current venture or something. So you sort of pick the one or two things that matters and just address that pretty directly in the agreement.
The logic, more or less, is that we want founders' interest, like the focus of the founder, to be in the companies and assets, like in the projects, which we as investors in the founder's future are co-owners, like the shareholders, sort of. Like we want the interest to be fully aligned. And therefore, if it is something which you're actively not involved at all, but still it's your company, which you created several years ago, but you don't like spend it any time in there, we probably don't need it in this agreement at all, even if it will make some money in the future. But if it's something which you actually actively involved in right now and is going to be involved in,
or can rebalance your time toward that.
Yes.
In this case, this should be included, because for investor in such security, it is really important that refocus of this founder to some of the ventures shouldn't change the outcome for investors. And that's where we kind of draw the line.
Yep, that makes sense. So you'd mentioned previously, I think I wasn't aware of this, but I think you said that Sam Lessin from Slow had previously experimented with something like this in the past. And of course, there's a variety of previous experiments that are to various degrees related or at least tangential to this. You mentioned, most of them didn't work. Some of them might have succeeded in some capacity, but obviously this isn't, an established asset like venture capital or anything like that. It's not an established mechanism. And not, hopefully it will become one, because I think for a lot of reasons, we can actually talk about sort of the impact of what would happen if this becomes, an established thing, not just for former founders, but for a broader category of people. But before we get to that, I'm just curious, like, having sort of evaluated these previous attempts and seen sort of what went wrong with them and coming up with your own hypothesis on how to actually execute this the right way. Can you talk a little bit about some of those, like basically that evaluation and what tweaks you've made to sort of address the issues that you've seen from experiments in the past?
Yes, so we already touched this, that we saw that all of these attempts were targeted individuals too early on their career path.
Right.
And even though we do believe that in the future, this would be possible for every individual to use such model.
And not only possible, but probably even more important for them to have access to capital through this mechanism than for the more experienced founders.
But what we saw that we shouldn't start it from that we should start from the experience founders, and through that prove the model to investors, and through that grow the interest scale, and only then it would be available for individuals on the younger individuals early in their careers. Because all of these previous attempts targeted students. They, 18 years old who never did such deals.
Or those who never did any business previously but want to start some business, like app starts of the world.
So this is the biggest change we made. We understand their passion, and we also every couple months we have the same conversation whether we should try it with people early in the career. But this is one of the main distinguish. But also another one is that some of these attempts tried to make it not through security type of mechanisms. Avoid being securities.
Because it seems to everyone that it's too complicated to go and deal with regulators around the legal securities.
But this type of attempts limited this
asset even to grow.
Yes, asset to grow. For example, this was the major reason why when Upstart tried this model early in their path, they had to limit the outcome for investors. But when you cap outcome for investors, you significantly decrease the probability of to investors to return their money. Because in some of the industries, including entrepreneurship,
in most of the intellectual and professional,
yes, there is power law. So few individuals will generate most of the outcome. This is how market works right now. So when you cap the outcome, you just cut out all the outlier type of outcomes. And in this case, you cannot really
you can't really statistically provide returns,
or valuation would be too low. Even with ourselves, we initially thought, we would like to have a cap so that after some X return to investors, they will not get anything. But we entered it to the model which we built and realized that in such a case,
it makes no
the
sense.
Valuation would be too low.
It would be even lower for us, and it makes no sense for the investors.
Yes. So
we try to model out a sort of fair market model which would work in benefit for all the participants, like literally all the participants. We believe that it will increase the general expected valuation, pretty much. Providing access to capital to those who don't have this right now.
Yeah, so this was the second point, that we realized that we should build an instrument which would be security type of instrument.
Yeah, what's interesting is there's a certain range of deal terms within which both the investor and the investee, the founder, would accept, right? And you need a range that overlaps, or else this type of deal is never going to get done. And it seems like there's a sizable range probably with this type of deal where it's interesting to both the investor and the founder, whether that's an experienced founder or maybe later, an early founder on totally different terms, or maybe, even eventually like an artist or a totally different, or a content creator, someone totally different. But it seems that there is a range. That's sort of an important thing, because there's some deals that just can't get done. It's just not sort of sensible. And here it is. But to your point, if there was a cap, there would be no investor who would touch it, because basically you're just cutting the power law companies at a certain height, and it just doesn't, the probability that any of these succeed, they make all their money on the power law, so there's no appeal to them at that point. But as a founder, you might like that, because obviously, past a certain point, your returns are sort of untaxed or whatever you want to call it. Tax may be a bad word, but you know, you're above a certain cap, you get all the returns. But a similarly attractive thing that I wonder if you've thought about as a, you know, for the founder, is, you know, yes, I would probably want like a cap if I could, but I understand why I can't. But I might also like if there was like a floor where, you know, if I don't have a certain amount of income, like above a certain point, then I don't have to worry about any of this. Like it's because it's a lot of like sort of overhead and like, you know, and you guys probably as the fund also, by the way, you guys being the fund and you guys are the investors and the investee. You're the investee in LibermansCo and you're the investors in Humanism. So that itself shows like you guys obviously believe that this model works and is good, you know, for both sides. But the floor is kind of interesting because for the investors, that's not where you're getting your returns anyway. And it cuts your overhead by like, you know, 90 or 95% or something. And as the investee, you don't have to worry about any of this unless you have an extreme return, basically. Have you guys thought about sort of a floor type of mechanism?
Yes, that's we actually added. So this added to the pledge agreements. We
So
usually have this floor. You're totally right that we also, in terms of potential legal challenges, we really understand that most of our outcome as investors in such securities would be from this outlier type of the cases. We don't
need to even touch the bottom.
So and we also believe that this is the right thing to do. This is a precedent which we want to set for this tool not to be used in the wrong way. So yes, we set this floor, and with all the investees and with ourselves, we do it as a standard.
What we can predict also, like talking more about how we see this technology can change the future, is if founders who failed with their particular, like let's say I'm a dropout of a college and I just started a startup, and a couple of years after I fail. This, for me, might be a very challenging time. Not only because I just feel myself a failure, but also because I still have a student debt. I probably spend all of my money, all of my savings to try to save my first startup because I truly believe that's the one. And by the moment when I am supposed to start the new one, I burned out and I'm broke. And therefore, there is no chance for me to even continue. In this way, we are losing potentially a successful founder of the next unicorn to just go and be hired by a corporation and work for them as a normal employee. Instead, if individuals like that still had some of their income untouched and not included in the future agreement, they might have some cushion to move on, continue, and start the new one, and start the new company, and figure out what to do next, and then raise money from the investors, and then be able to raise money for their into themselves again, like another 5%. So we see that this will generally makes much easier to be a founder and to risk and remove unnecessary boundaries and unnecessary pressure. Because like what's interesting is that if you will look at majority of the billion plus dollar companies, they are all created. They're not all. The majority of them are created by founders who never had a financial struggle in their life. They came from the upper middle class families or higher. Their education was paid by their parents or by grants. They clearly could have. They clearly can live their life without risking, and yet they do this, and yet they risk. And then it's them who actually create majority of the billion-dollar companies, because we believe that there's a specific necessary level of security, financial safety, which is needed to risk even more. And yes, we can clearly see that there are people like us who came from very poor families, and that through the struggle, we figured some solutions for some problems and we built companies, and etc.
But
we're minority, not the majority of the cases.
And even in our case, we clearly see that our advantage early on in our career was due to the fact that we had the computer much earlier than our peers, because our parents are scientists. We
had a PC at home at 1986.
Much earlier than everyone around us, and that's definitely allowed us to actually use this opportunity and to
gain an advantage.
Yes,
like, and basically be earlier in the tech overall.
So that that's why we are personally are quite proponents of the view that access to the resources is much needed, and that the world today is non-optimal in terms of what people can achieve,
what humanity can achieve.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I always, after each time you guys are sort of done speaking on something, I have like 7 different directions I want to go. But one, I think that's kind of interesting. There's this is already obviously a very bold and sort of I don't know if risky is the right word, but it's very novel. And you guys seem to be sort of going pedal to the metal right from the bat, not only by sort of doing it yourselves and starting a fund that's investing in 20 or 30 or more founders, I think in the coming year alone, that are doing this for themselves, and you guys are the investors on those deals. But you're also, I think, on the LibermansCo side of things, hoping to go public. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you're pushing to do that quickly, and what that sort of offers in terms of what the motivation is?
I'll make a remark, and then David will continue with going public. We believe that the model which we propose is less risky, honestly, and the mathematics and statistics show this.
But we should prove it.
But we should prove it first.
So you're right. So as we mentioned before that, we saw that it is really important for these assets to be security. And what else is important, that the security should be liquid in the time horizon less than 30 years. So it should be liquid at least like in 7-10 years from the moment investors invest.
And honestly, the earlier the better.
But otherwise, the venture funds and private equity funds or pension funds, they will not invest in such securities. So we need to be more standard for them to make such a choice. But to make it liquid, we should demonstrate that there are liquidity events similar to what you would expect when you invest in a company. And one of the most common liquidity event is actually going public. And
for the large outliers.
Yeah. So as soon as
in this version, you can't quite get acquired. Probably that's probably not what you want.
Yes, you're right. That's why there is only this option.
In this option, we can let's say if one of our companies is acquired,
then we can
pay dividends.
Yes, but going public was kind of an inspiration for us from the very first day. So when we only started the design of LibermansCo and the structure and the legal agreement,
we proposed SEC to have several calls and ask several questions from them,
mostly about
them being comfortable of such structure to go public.
And right now we already have calls with bankers who usually do help companies to go public, and with stock exchanges to be sure that we actually meet all the requirements of the exchanges. So with LibermansCo, we wanted to do it earlier, not even waiting for 7 to 10 years, because for us, it's not only about our liquidity and our investors' liquidity, but about demonstration, which will enable more investment in this direction. So more founders will be able to do that, even though probably for them, still this type of liquidity event would be like 7-10 years from now. But just demonstration of that can kind of
unlock
the imagination of the investors, so they will understand that it's no difference from investment in the startups. But then they can look at the statistics. Daniil mentioned that actually statistically it's less risky investment to make, and actually it can generate similar returns to the conventional venture capital. So we just see that as soon as we will remove the risk that might be these securities cannot be liquid, then it will enable dozens of billions and hundreds of billions of dollars to be invested in such equities.
Yeah, it's sort of like the full start to finish in a way, and you're just not taking a decade to do it because you don't really need to. You've already got, you guys are established and the valuation is quite high, and it just adds legitimacy to the entire, not just you guys and your entity, but the entire mechanism. Basically, it shows that it can go all the way to liquid. And we mentioned, like, obviously acquisition isn't really an option for someone to own like all of your guys' income. IPO though works. I'm thinking of other alternatives for liquidity, and I can't help but think about crypto a little bit. And I'm not sure how you guys, how into it or not into it you may be, but if you've thought of, if there's any, obviously a lot of projects out there will just sort of slap crypto onto it to make it, whatever, trendy or relevant or whatever, do an NFT project. But for certain applications, obviously crypto can be extremely useful in a way that you sort of couldn't do the thing without crypto. Is there any area of this that strikes you as maybe being sort of ripe for a crypto type of application or use, or did you think about that at all?
We actually developing the way to tokenize these securities. For us, it's really important that we will not pretend that it's not security, how most of the crypto projects unfortunately do. But we want to build a path to follow all the rules which set by regulators to then tokenize the securities. Because for sure, when you have some outlier type of founders with really high valuation, going public would be the option. But for a kind of mid-size and like small cap type of founders, we definitely want to build another path. And tokenization is for sure in our minds is the path for that. And that's why we right now develop the structure in the legal framework for it to happen.
And blockchain here is mainly a tool of a decentralized ledger which everyone can trust and use
and transact
faster.
So I may have missed it, but what is the reason why tokenization is optimal for smaller cap individuals versus larger cap?
No, because it clearly just like it's smaller caps won't be able to go public, and therefore they need some mechanism for liquidity of
I see. Okay.
And then it's basically we could have probably built a secondary market.
Like Carta X.
Like Carta X is trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
But tokenization is making it simpler in terms of transacting on chain.
Yeah.
Seem to be like super straightforward, easy. No one have to trust us. It's all out there. Everyone can see who owns what. So there is like a level of transparency which regulators might want such transactions to have and stuff like this.
Right. It's like an established path to faster liquidity basically than
like
traditional methods.
Mid-term liquidation.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. I'm trying to think. I know we have about 10 minutes left here, and it's been a fascinating conversation. Maybe we can spend the last several minutes, take this chance maybe for you guys to add any additional comments to this general category that we've been discussing of this new type of investing that we've been talking about, whether it's LibermansCo, humanism, or the concept in general. And then maybe we could just spend the last few minutes. You guys live a very interesting and very different life, and it might be interesting just to hear a little bit about like I'm always obsessed with like people's like daily routines and habits that sort of make them special and you know, sort of maybe drive part of their success, or things that they believe in for people listening to maybe try out themselves.
I would probably start from the end, like the routines. I'm not sure that we have too many of the routines, but one which actually probably is a multitude of different routines is the level of transparency which we have between the two of us. I mean, we clearly have no private space in between the two of us, which roots out lots of the individual demons, I would say, like personal demons. And those demons like just fade away. The light is always lead upon them. And in this way, we manage to help each other grow a lot. And we can clearly see that it's possible.
Yeah, whenever you send a message to
me or him, like
both of us get.
You actually can be sure that both of us can read it.
So it is a really interesting experiment, which we believe led to a lot of situations and successes in our life.
So we live this way already for over 25 years, and likely going to live throughout our entire life, and we are about to see how it will go. And yet, so far, I would say I would recommend other people to live this life.
At least, you know, like 8 billion people
live the
other way. So maybe a little bit more, like a couple million people can try this way. In general, we believe that currently we taught our kids to see themselves individually, you know, like that you're individuals who have your own individual careers, while what we saw in our personal experience that actually groups which can act as one, they have a quite significant value on the market.
And this is interesting, like we're not talking about like collectivism, like everyone have to be one. No, actually, honestly, like
the group
building an organism, a system of people who you can trust, who you love, you can spend most of your time together. Like you would not feel any bad about spending 100% of time with these people. Makes you never being alone, makes you never being lonely.
But also increase your value in the market significantly. That's why all the acquisitions are happening. Like actually companies buy teams, solid teams which know how to work with each other. So definitely we think that this experience, and this can start from simple stuff like sharing locations, or like sharing emails, or sharing
having transparency in communication and
finance.
For all startups, easier.
Yeah, for all startups, we really advise that all of the partners, at least all the founders, all the investors, should see everything which is happening with the companies financially. It is really important.
Not necessarily all of the employees, and only because for some employees it might be hard from time to time to see through what challenges and risks founders and executive of the company have to overcome themselves.
But we ran some companies where like it was full transparency for everyone.
For everyone.
Like everyone saw,
and there was no single problem. Moreover, we can clearly see that we avoided lots of unpleasant situations by being that transparent.
So we definitely recommend.
That's about our routines.
And about what we want to add, I think one thing which we haven't touched and is really important for us in terms of this project, that it's not only
a deeper reason
about the opportunity for like
individuals or investors,
and this high caliber of founders or investors. We really see that there is underlying problem in the world, that through the last 30 years, because of the decisions, regulations, which were made in 80s and 90s, what we see is that for every next generation, it is harder to accumulate wealth. And what was accessible for generation which was born in 50s is not accessible for younger generations right now. And we see it as kind of source of most of the main challenges, at least in the economy right now.
And we see that it's going to get even worse, because as soon as we will get to the point when next generation after us, the Gen Zs of the world, will get to their 30 years old on average as a generation, likely this generation on average still not going to have any wealth. They're still going to be in negative and probably in debts.
And this will lead to decrease of entrepreneurship,
decrease of taking risk, decrease of honestly just motivation to do anything.
And we definitely all, from different angles, should
attack this problem
to try to change that, to try to fix that, and to try to build the world when young generation actually have all the resources they need.
And the way we saw this was always the wealth of young isn't their future. It's the product of their own labor in the future and talent. While the wealth, the existing wealth is all about the past, how much you managed to save and earn throughout the last 30, 40 years, or your even ancestors earned earlier before that. What's interesting, the future wealth of the youngs is not included in the economy right now. And if we will just include it in the same mechanisms of market, we will discover that the market is much bigger. The accessibility of capital is much easier for younger.
And young people
have all the resources they need to risk, to create, to innovate, and to be motivated to quadruple output of labor and output of market every 30 years,
and build the better world,
the better world in the future. So we see this as a very important aspect of why we are doing this,
and why humanism is important for us.
But that's not necessarily the reason why investors should do this. They should do this because it's less risky and higher return.
It's good when you can figure out something that makes money, but also is good for the world. So it sounds like every party sort of has interests here, and it should be a net good thing, I think, in the end. Even though, it's weird with this concept. I never really understood it, but it's regarded as somewhat controversial, it seems, with mainstream media and whatnot, because people are like, oh, you shouldn't have to give away a percentage of your personal money or whatever. But it's it's just sort of ignoring the details and things, and jumping to conclusions around worst case scenarios and whatnot. And I think it's very clear that what you guys are doing, you've been extremely thoughtful, and have sort of set a mechanism that will avoid a lot of downside possibilities, and at the same time make the system hopefully work in a way that it can start with these experienced founders, and eventually, to your guys' point, you can maybe give every potential founder or just high potential person the opportunity to sort of operate in life in their younger years and throughout their careers in a way in which, previously only people who are sort of born with a certain degree of financial stability and comfort were sort of able to do, or some sort of advantages early in life were able to do, and can take those risks that those, a small percentage of people in the world have been able to do. And hopefully we'll end up with a lot more, sort of great individuals. So anyway, very excited for what you guys are doing, and can't wait to see how it all plays out. But where should people go if they want to, learn more about this, or follow you guys, or what you're working on, or maybe even if there's some experienced founders listening, they might like to apply to be considered for something like this through Humanism? Where do you want to send people?
Recently, we started more actively running our Instagram account, and probably it's easier to find everything we try to communicate through our Instagram account right now.
It's Libermans.
It's Libermans. Libermans, plural form of the Liberman.
And
LIB, I don't know, like you probably will post it somewhere with the correct spelling of our last name. But also
Humanism.is.
IS.
Yes, it is a website where you can actually sign up for the wait lists and let us know that you are interested in that concept.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, David and Daniil. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you both. And again, I just can't wait to see how all this plays out. I think it's an awesome idea, and you guys seem like you're have a great idea of how to execute all of it and have already started. So I'm very excited and wish you guys best of luck.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.